Everybody, yeah, I know, I just called. We're getting the party started. Hello, everyone. That was my Carl Haas moment there.
Here's a random
Is
question
everybody
for you.
ready to begin? Am I on?
Yes.
Thank you. First, order of business, I don't know if it's an order, it's a guideline. Make sure we all talk into our microphones tonight because there is a huge television audience watching us tonight. Come on in, come on in. So I just had a reminder from AV that we should all talk into our microphones to make sure that all of our comments are heard. Welcome everybody to the first of several meetings with the Planning Policy Commission, the Human Services Commission, and the Economic Vitality Commission. I'm Trish Hainonen, I'm from Development Services, and I have the happy honor of being part of the housing strategy that we're all going to be working on together. And first I would love everyone to say who you are and what commission you're on as we go around the, I'm going to call it the United Nations table where all the commissioners are. We'll start with Joan.
So I'm Joan Probola, I'm the chair of the Planning Policy.
I'm John Staub, I'm on the Planning Policy Commission.
I'm Joy Lewis, I'm on the Planning Policy Commission.
Derek Franklin, Human Services Commission.
Ana Jimenez-Simon, Human Services Commission.
Ron Fall on the Policy and Planning Commission.
Jeff Howlett, Economic Vitality Commission.
Derek Doak, Economic Vitality Commission.
Laura Milligan, Economic Vitality.
Christy Triple, Raleigh Properties. And one thing I did, and I'm on the Economic Vitality Commission, one thing I did want to share, I do work for a property owner here in Issaquah and that manages property. We have an affordable housing component within our development agreement with the city, but I wanted to make that aware to all of you as my peers this evening that I'm here with my hat on for the good of the city and the overall vitality for this community. So if anyone has an issue or thinks it's a conflict of interest, I definitely want to make sure I put that on the table.
Ethan Stiles, Economic Vitality Commission.
Richard Gable, Economic Vitality Commission. That didn't work.
Excellent. And Elizabeth, you get to go now. Just say who you are and which commission you're on.
Elizabeth Maupin, I'm on the Human Services Commission.
Excellent. Anybody else we missed? Okay then. This was in your packet. You received some information this past week and there was a few homework assignments. But first I'm going to give you a little bit of why we're here. And the council has a goal to have a housing strategy, partly because they had a affordable housing goal a few years ago. We did a report card on affordable housing last summer and we weren't doing very well as a city and we're not doing very well as a region. So they asked us to do a housing strategy, not just for affordability, but a complete housing strategy. And this is the work plan we came out with. We're in the second step of the housing strategy. We had an inventory that was presented to the council in September. And you all are going to help us with the needs analysis so we can figure out, do we have any gaps in affordability? Do we have gaps in the types of houses that we offer in Issaquah? And we're going to be doing outreach and we're going to be using all of your heads and thoughts and experiences to help us craft a really great needs assessment so we can send that off into step 3, which you'll also be involved in, which would be figuring out the policy conversation and what policies will help us to implement a good housing strategy for the city. One of the homeworks that we asked you to do is some items that you thought were amazing. Some numbers or some statistics that you thought were pretty amazing in the inventory and the material we had you read. And these were a couple of mine that, that surprised me, is that over 30% are people with kids in our community. I thought it was higher than that, but it's not as high as I thought it was. And 30% of folks are just living on their own here. So we have a whole singles component. So I thought that was really interesting as the types of households that we have here in our community. The other one that I knew about, just because I've been doing so many annexations, is we've grown a lot since 2000. And this doesn't include the folks like from South Cove that we inherited, on the other annexations. So this is just actual people that have moved here since 2000. So 16,000 have moved here since 2000. Of those folks that live here and work here, only 1,500 people actually live here and work here, which gives us an idea of why there's so much traffic going in and out of town. Is we don't have a huge amount or even a small amount, like a majority of folks that actually live and work here and don't have to go in and out on our arterials to go to and from work. So one of the things we're looking at is there a way that we can make the balance a little better to have people able to choose to work and live here? That's something that we'll be working on. The other housing fact that I thought was interesting is the largest share of our housing inventory is 3 bedrooms or more. So when you think of the kids that we have and the singles that we have, 3 bedrooms or more, they may be pretty big for the folks that actually are living in the community. So that was something that I thought was an interesting fact. So with that, my time is up, and I think it goes to Jen? Goes to Arthur already? Are you ready? Let's see, I have to escape. No, escape. And then, what? You don't want these markers? I do. Oh. Then I will leave them there. Do you want me to start it, or do you want to start it? Why isn't it easy to start it? There it is. Current slide, right? Do you want me to do anything?
Hi, everybody. So I've met with some of you in the past in your different commissions and over the years, and I've basically been working on housing stuff. The city of Issaquah is a member of ARCH, and ARCH is just a partnership of cities in East King County that was formed by the cities to provide resources to the cities to have specialized staff and the ability to work together on some issues around housing, and with a special emphasis on what we refer to as affordable housing. And so I have been literally working on stuff in Issaquah longer than Keith, I believe. I literally worked on the original development agreement for Issaquah Highlands back in the early 90s. So I have been around this city off and on. And so tonight, and my job is, one of our jobs at ARCH is to help cities talk about the issue of housing in their community. So you got some data there, and before we come back to you and let you start, what's your reaction to data and see what questions you have, I wanted to give you some thoughts and context that might help set up not only tonight's conversation, but the work that you're helping the city do, which is to work on creating a strategy plan. So it's about thinking about housing in different ways besides just what you saw from Trish, which is, well, we have this many housing units and we have this many 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. There's other ways of thinking about housing when you're trying to put a plan together. And so the first thing I want to do is put up on here is what do we mean? Because the term affordability, I could probably go around the room and ask each of you what you think affordability means, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's over 10 of you, and there would be over 10 answers, and you'd all be right. Okay. So one of the things, I used to do development. We never used the term affordable, low-income housing, or anything like that. We would say we're helping people at a certain income level with rents at a certain level, and that's what this chart does. It sort of gives you some context as to what we're talking about, because this is what the comp plan says. So this is the plan that we have to work from. This is the terminology we use. And so in the last few years, we've, in the comprehensive plan work that we've done, we identified 3 different levels of, quote, affordability per se, and they all work off of median income. And the median income right now in King County is $90,000, just over $90,000 for a family of 4. And all the numbers you see in this chart work from this table, from that one number. And so what it is for what we call very low income, that's 30% of median income. That's an income of $18,000, just over $18,000 to almost $27,000 a year. somebody in that income range would be able to afford a rent of around $500 to around $700 a month. That's what would be considered affordable. Affordable is defined as 1/3 of your income towards housing expenses. Low income is $31,000 to $45,000 a year, depending on your household size, and means rents of $790 to $1,130 a month. And moderate income is $1,264 to $1,800, and is an income of up to $72,000 a year. So if you translate that to hourly wages, $30,000, that's the low end for the low income, is $15 an hour, that magical number that we hear about in context sometimes in discussions like in Seattle and around the country about minimum wages. So you can see here that when we're talking about these different affordability levels, they're still talking about levels that are salaries for people in our community, in our region. What we've also added on this slide, and this is in the data that we gave you, is what are average rents right now in Issaquah. And you can see they average $1,170 for a studio to well over $2,000 for a 3-bedroom, which is basically saying that you have to have income over 80% of median to afford the average price rental unit in the community. We also have some information here on slides that relate to types of salaries you have in your community. And I'll come back to this one in a bit, but the point this slide makes is there's a lot of jobs whose salaries are in that even very low income and low income range in your community. Okay, so that's starting to get at a demand thing. Where is the need for housing coming from? A lot of it's coming from your workforce. So the first thing I want to ask you, or now I'm going to sort of back up for a second, so that now that you can sort of see these different affordability levels, is when I'm working in a community, when I think about housing, and what I'm trying to do in a housing plan or working with a city, is what we're trying to do is say, what kind of households do we have in our community? Do I need to carry this with me when I'm talking, or be close to it? Okay. So the question is, what type of households do we have in our community, and what's their income level? And so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to open up to you, what kind of households? These are, household, family type units. Trish listed some, but let's share with me what you think are the different kinds of households in your community. Anybody want to jump in first? So I'm talking about, like she said, there's married with children. Okay, that's a kind of household. There's different formations of people and living situations. So what other kinds of examples do we have?
Multi-generational.
Okay, so can I call it extended family?
Yes.
Okay, so we have extended family. We have so that's one. I said married with children. Okay, others?
Single with children.
Someone else, please. Sorry, I'll go way back with Elizabeth. Other people, please.
More than one family in the same
Okay.
living unit?
All right. Family sharing. Does that cover it? Okay. Others? Well, I'm just writing while I hear.
Married, no children.
Okay. All right. So that was married, no children, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to ask a leading question, and that is, are there different types in terms of potentially housing needs of that group?
Within that group?
Yeah, within this category of married with no children at home, I can think of two very distinct situations that are very different.
Yeah, empty nesters
Right.
versus young family.
Right, so you have the empty nester, and then you have the young family. So you can have both of those. Others? Other types of households.
Single with
individuals.
children.
Single with children. Okay? So a single parent with children.
And just plain single individuals.
You do this all the time. Let's get other people going. So I heard, what did I just hear? Single? Okay. So I heard single. Others? Well, let's talk about singles for a minute. There's probably different kinds of single populations out there.
Seniors.
Okay, you got single senior. Others?
Young adults?
Young adults, okay. So you've got seniors, young adults. Okay, others?
Middle-aged adults.
Others?
I would say your college student who's
Great. Student,
not yet
college.
started a career.
Okay, so college student, which in some of the towns I work with, because ARCH is a coalition of cities all over East King County, that's a really big issue in a couple of the cities I work in, Bellevue, Bothell, right? Really big issue there. Even Kirkland has that, and you're going to maybe have that someday. So, okay, so you have college, young adult, senior. Any other types of singles that you can think of?
Disabled?
Hmm?
Disabled?
Thank you. Very good. Disabled. And there's all kinds of different disabilities. Okay? Anybody else have any other ideas?
Divorcees.
Divorcees, okay. So that's... Okay, so think of this as think of it as a matrix. And this is your y-axis. Now your x-axis, and I don't have a big enough piece of paper here, is I would do income. And income can be from 0, right, no money, to, now depending on the city, we can literally say the richest person in the world in East King County, if we look at that area, right? And so it's literally an exercise, if you think about it, of drawing grids with different income levels and a cross like this, right? And the whole thing is you could look at your community and you could start figuring out how many people you have in every box. And your goal in a housing plan is to have housing that matches that matrix. Okay? That's when I go into a community, that's what I'm always thinking. All right? So that's just to give you some context of how to think about a housing strategy plan. Is it's really looking at people in your community and their different household and their different circumstances, which is primarily when you think of housing, types of households and income. And some different forms of housing might be able to serve different populations here, but the question is, do you have choices for all of those different folks?
Is that your workforce population or your homeowner population that you're
They would
evaluating?
be, I mean, your workforce will have all different kinds of people, but you don't build a housing for a workforce. I used to do development. I buy saying, okay, I want to do 1 bedrooms because I think they're singles. I'm going to do 2 bed. There was a period when I first did development, we built a lot of 2 bedroom, 2 baths. You know why? It was the Bay Area.
Roommates.
2 individuals could live together and both have bathrooms, and because housing expenses were getting so high that having a 2 bedroom, 2 bath could fit for both a family and 2 individuals, and it made your market bigger for who you could serve. So that's an example where, you know, but you're thinking about all of these things. Oh, who might go into that different product types I would have, and how many are out there in the community, and are they having challenges with other kinds of housing needs? So if I build that, I might fill it up pretty good. That's why in downtown Redmond, you see micro units being built. And they built 1, and he immediately built a 2nd, and he immediately built a 3rd. Because he couldn't fill them up fast enough because of the market demand coming from a lot of the singles. You know, they have a small school, right? They have DigiPen there and things along those lines. So it's taking the workforce, but you still transfer it back to incomes. And, you know, because there's a lot of young singles in Redmond, and therefore they needed lower rents, and given the costs, the best solution was small units. And not everyone will do that, but there was enough of a need that some percentage wanted to do that. Okay, so that's is just sort of some context for thinking about the issue. So I started to allude to, and you mentioned it, the workforce. So now I want to talk a little bit about the demand, and just show you a couple slides. And again, all this information you have here was in the report, and we're going to come back and let you share what you thought was important. So I'm going to now do what Trish did. And the first thing I've always looked at, and literally my thesis, was doing jobs housing balance in Sunnyvale, California. Anybody know where Sunnyvale, California is? It's the heart of the Silicon Valley. And they were having, this was back in the early 80s, believe it or not. They were dealing with housing price issues, and what they looked at was jobs housing balance. So this idea is to say, how much demand are you generating from your workforce, and how much housing do you have to house that workforce? Now the reason the first section is looking at Issaquah. If you're at 1, that means you're, quote, the amount of housing in your community is equal to the amount of demand from your workforce. And the amount of demand for workforce is you assume more than one worker per household. So it's not a one-to-one. You know, if you have 10,000 jobs, you need 10,000 housing units. Like if you have 10,000 jobs, you need like 7,500 housing units because there's more than one worker per household on average. On average. There's not 1.4 in households, but so when you go above 1, it means you have more demand from your workforce than you do supply of housing. Now, it's not necessarily a big deal if your city is like that and everybody around you has the opposite, because then it adds up and you're at about 1. Now, I work in an area, the Arch sphere of influence, Arch is East King County, and what we saw is back in 1980, the overall area had much more housing than it had demand for housing from the workforce. And that completely changed over 15 years. Okay, from going from well below 1, and this only shows you 2006 and then looking into the future. But you can see when we add up all of East King County, we are now to a point where that ratio is 1.25. You're higher than that, but even when you add Bellevue, when you add the unincorporated areas where there's no jobs, when you add that all together, you have a ratio that's 1.25. It's as high as Seattle's. And in the old days, if you're old like me, the old tradition was all the jobs were in the central city and everybody lived outside the central city and commuted back and forth. Well, Seattle's, that was the ratio they had before. They've always been around that ratio. But the thing is, when we went above 1, Seattle didn't go down. So now you've got 2 areas that are creating more demand for housing, 2 large areas, than they do housing available. So that's what this chart's trying to show you. And then the brown is, what does our plan say? What will happen if we build exactly to our plan? And our plan says, not only in your city, but in East King County as a whole, we're going to make the ratio even higher. That's what our plans say cumulatively. So that's a simplistic kind of thing. It's not meant to be an absolute, but it's just sort of a general condition in your community. Not everybody works and lives in their city, but that's why we broaden it out and look at what does the surrounding region look like. But then the other bigger and as important thing is what's the profile of the jobs, salaries in your communities? And so what we're trying to show you here is that almost 40% of the jobs in Issaquah pay less than $35,000 annually. Okay? And what this other chart shows you is that the income, that different kinds of jobs, the top bar is a ratio equal to 80% of median, and the lower bar is an income at 50% of median. So what we're basically showing you here is the first few jobs that are all listed there have salaries below 50% of median. And the ones in the middle are between 50 and 80, and then we have a couple there that are just above 80% of median. So the only point we're trying to make here, there's a lot of jobs in your community that are paying, that are an integral part of your community that are paying low and moderate salaries. Illustrated by the fact, how many people are familiar with Issaquah Family Village? Raise your hand, right? You're all familiar with that? Everyone who moves in there has to have an income, their household income has to be under 60% of median when they move in. Some of the people have to have incomes below 30 and even 50% of median. Look at where they work in your community. That's what this chart over here is showing you. They just did a survey of some of the residents to show you where they're not unemployed. This is where they're working in your community. So that's sort of the connection of types of jobs in your community. So going back to this matrix, you know, it's sort of this thing here. And a lot of your workforce have jobs that are low or moderate paying. So what are the implications to your households? Because people are living here. Well, one of the first implications of some of these trends you see is what's being called cost-burdened households. And this is when people pay more than that 30% figure. And what's probably even more significant is a term called severely cost-burdened. And that's when people pay more than 50%. So if 30% to stretch, what does it mean when you're paying more than 50% of your income for living? And I'll let you guys sort of think about that. What we've seen is that almost 40% of renters are cost burdened. And what's been really intriguing is that in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a significant increase in severely cost burdened renters in our East King County community, and you in Issaquah in particular went from 13 to 21%. And what the graphic is trying to show you is when you break it down by income level, that basically if you're under 50% of median income, you got an 80% chance you're going to be cost burdened. And most of you will be severely cost burdened. And they're in your community. Okay? In other words, 21% of the renters in your community living here now are severely cost burdened. That's what people do. They just pay more of their income to live. They don't necessarily always move. They do things along that line. Another trend is homelessness. Probably some of you have heard this. There's lots of different statistics, but one of them is how many homeless school children do we have in East King County? And this shows it by district, and I shaded Issaquah. So Issaquah has over 100 children in the school district who are homeless. And that can mean either they're doubled up or they're in shelter. As you see, we've broken it all out here for you. And other school districts on the east side. So cumulatively, there's over 800 kids in the East King County school districts who are homeless. So this goes back to that earlier slide where one of the things we look at on sort of a cumulative level is when you look at King County as a whole, and your salary profile in Issaquah is similar to the salary profile of King County as a whole. In fact, if anything, your salaries are a little bit lower when you look at the cross-section of how many are earning under like 30,000, how many between 30 and 50. Your percentages are slightly different, slightly lower than they are countywide. But what we're showing here is when you look at households cumulatively in King County, you have 12% of households are under 30% of median, 12% are between 30 and 50, and another 16% are earning between 50 and 80. I've been doing this a long time. This is not a new cross-section. This is about what we've always been. This is what our economy creates. If we grow, there's a good chance that your growth from jobs, et cetera, will have an income profile similar to what you see here. Now what the yellow, the middle bar, and the green bar are showing you is how much housing is affordable, what percentage of our housing stock is affordable at each of those levels. The yellow bar, the middle one, is in King County as a whole, and the green one is Issaquah. You're not alone. Most of the cities I work for have very similarly shaped graphics when you put this slide up on the wall. That's the situation in East King County, has been for some time. This is another illustration is what's been going on with rents in our community. And again, I've been tracking rents for a long time, and this graphic shows you a rent over time of what's affordable at 80% of median, what is affordable at 50% of median, and then what have rents been historically in East King County as a whole, at least since 2000, and what have they been in Issaquah since 2000? What stands out to somebody who looks at this chart?
The discrepancy between what the average rents are in Issaquah and what's affordable for people at those two levels,
Okay.
particularly in recent years.
Anything else? Okay. Yes.
Incomes aren't keeping up with rent.
Right. Okay. What else? There's one other thing in this graphic that's a little different for especially the last few years. The steepness of the curve. For those of you who do math and statistics and stuff, steep curve means a lot of change fast. Okay. Mm-hmm. What is the scary thing to me is we have seen trends where rents go up and rents go down and rents go up and rents go down. And if I did King County, and this has been true since I've been here since 90, the King County overall number would be like following my arrow. East King County rents have always been higher than countywide. That's been going on for 25 plus for forever. But they never went across the 80% threshold. And whether or not we're going to have a correction like we saw here may or may not, because the income profile is the same that we've had in the past. But this is a trend that I haven't experienced in 25 years, and that's a flag. Whether or not we might correct, I don't know. But right now, that's something we haven't seen before, is average rents above 80%, affordable at above 80% of median. So now, and I'm going to keep this because we might need it later. So now I got another chart I want to do with you. And this other chart is, so what do cities do about this? Okay. So now another sort of general conversation about what affects the housing that's put on the ground in our community. Okay. So who are the players that impact the form, the price, the location, et cetera, of housing in our community. The first one I'll put is the landowner. Okay? They want a certain price for their land. So the first player is a landowner. They impact what goes on with housing. Another one is the developer. It's the one who actually comes in and builds something. Okay, I'm going to open it up. What other players out there impact the housing in our community?
Employers?
Employers? And what, say a little bit more.
Some, you know, when they offer good jobs,
Mm-hmm.
then people want to move closer
Okay?
and, you know, increase
Okay, right.
the services they have.
Okay,
where they
very
live.
good. Okay, that's a good one. Others?
Transportation.
Okay, I'm not going to put, that's, you know, that's not a bad one. It wasn't one that I was originally thinking of, but I'm going to put it on because it does have an impact. I call it more of an indirect impact.
Real estate agents and.
Real estate agents, okay? Real estate agents have an impact.
Schools?
Hmm?
Schools?
That impacts demand, so I'm going to put that down there like with transportation. What else? Who else is kind of impacts what that house looks like?
The city zoning.
City regulations, right, land use regulations. Has a big impact. All right, and I didn't say city, and there's a reason why you'll find out in a couple minutes. But see, okay, land use regulations. All right, others? Hmm? Banks. Not just, I'm going to put financing.
Vendors?
Financing, okay? There's reasons I'm using some of the terminology I'm using here, and you'll, again, like I said, see in a minute. Financing, okay, who else?
Permitting?
Okay, land use and / permitting. Yep, but they are different and they're both important, so they both need to be acknowledged, especially for the work you'll be doing. Okay, who else? What the house or homes or whatever look like.
The builder, architect.
The architect, the designers, okay? All right, who else?
So, government fees and taxes.
Okay, I'm going to put that under, what would I put that under? Sure, I'll put that, all right, we'll put fees, okay? Public fees, okay? What else? There's a couple other players that were in my mind.
Construction market, general contractors.
Okay, so there you have the builder. So I'm going to put the developer, and actually, you know, the builder is separate from the developer, and they can have an impact. Okay, there's a couple other players.
City council?
Hmm?
City council?
No, I'm not going to say council. I'm going to put them under land use regulation city, but you're getting a little closer. There's two main players that we haven't talked about yet.
State?
Nope. Well, yeah, I mean, yes.
The market.
Thank you. The people who are going to live in the housing,
Owners, yeah.
right? The residents.
Buyers.
I'm going to call them the residents. But now, take that same concept and twist it a little differently. There's very similar, but twist it.
The renter?
The neighbors. Okay? Neighbors have often a huge impact because they provide input that affects what councils are willing to do with land use. In my life, neighbors have been a huge impact on what I do. Okay? So neighbors. So that's a pretty full list, right? There's probably a couple more, but that gives you an idea. All of these things affect housing. Now, most people I often hear say, oh, government should get involved with housing. And when you hear a statement like that, what are they probably talking about? They're probably talking about public housing, big, huge public housing projects. They're bad. They were bad. They had crime. They had this. They had that. And the point I'm just trying to point out is in those kinds of developments, And so people say, because that went bad, government's not good in housing. We're a private market system to build housing. Our country relies mostly on the private market. But the comment I would make is, in public housing, that probably the government, the public, was the landowner, the developer, the designer. Oh, I forgot one, a big, huge one, property manager. Okay? So you have property manager. Sorry, I knew there was one I was forgetting. And the government played all of these roles. They pretty much did a lot of these. Okay? And what's changed a lot in the last 20 years is that maybe government still has a role, but not quite the same, that they can pick and choose in which areas. They're always, land use regulation, that's the most obvious. But as you'll see in some of the strategies that I just go through quickly, government can sort of pick and choose how they can interject or involve in order to allow the market to do its thing. And sometimes they just make it so the market can do it on its own. And other times they sort of go, we're going to help steer the market, but we're still not going to be the managers. But that's something to think about, is different ways government can help shape these players in order to create, back to here, the housing market variety of needs. And we rely primarily, we're a system that relies on the private market. So trying to blend those two things together is when you start thinking about a plan and how to go about doing a plan and where the city interjects. So that's just sort of big picture thinking as we move forward, how to do it. So just examples of strategies that cities have used and you've used over the years, just a couple real quick. And we're going to talk about this more in other meetings, but things like accessory dwelling units, allowing people to build small apartments in their homes. You've done that. Other cities in East King County have done that. The next example here is where cities will say, we're going to change the zoning, and as a result of changing that zoning, we're going to ask, request, demand the private builders to include some housing at certain price points. You have that up in Issaquah Highlands. You have it in the development agreement that Christy was referring to. They have it in other agreements. You have it in your Central Issaquah plan, and other cities in East King County have been doing the same thing. We're going to allow you to build more. We want to capture some public benefit out of doing that, and we're going to target it to certain needs. Other times, it's just allowing the market to be able to be more flexible to respond to this circumstance. Do you let the market decide? The example I gave in Redmond. A builder said, I can build these really small units, and they will fill up, and it will meet a need. City had to do some stuff with its code to make that product work. Okay, so that's another example of doing it. Parking requirements. A lot of cities are looking at that, and I know that's going to be an issue you're going to talk about. What's the balance for parking? Because especially more and more so, it's becoming an expensive cost. So the builders say, we want to do less. You got transit. Do you need as much? And others saying, wait a minute, we don't want spillover parking. So there's a variety of types of things you can do with your land use regulations that are listed here. Another example is, and I don't have anything listed for Issaquah, some cities now exempt property taxes for a period of time on buildings in exchange for some of the units being affordable. So they're playing basically the fees and financing pieces that I had listed here, right? They're saying we can do that, but it's still going to be a private developer. It's still going to be a most of the project market rate, but some portion of the units will still be privately managed, just like all the others. But we can use a financing tool in order to help the private market meet a need that we've identified. When cities do that, they'll say, this is the need we want. This is a gap we see in the city, and that's where we want to go. Same thing with impact fees. Sometimes, that was on the list here, fees. Some cities will waive the fees. You've done that quite a bit up in Issaquah Highlands and other areas when projects meet certain affordability requirements. These are all, let's see. Then the other is the city of Issaquah combined with other cities have actually put up money, and then that money gets shared by cities to directly assist housing that will be affordable. Usually those projects are then going after state money, federal money, county money, and that's where we are able to get to much lower income levels and serve people in the 50% to 30% level. So that's something that has been uniquely done in East King County, where cities share their funds and move them around. And then sometimes when we do it, we specifically are looking for people who are going to provide housing that meets people with special needs. Many of you probably know of Leo House in town, serves people with disabilities. We have several groups on the east side who are serving homeless households. You did something with Compassion House, where the city donated a house and somebody donated a piece of land and people donated labor, and that became a house for people who are homeless. So sometimes you're combining private and public resources in order to make special needs housing happen. And then sometimes you supported through the trust fund homeless housing in your neighboring cities. Bellevue and Bellevue has some in projects in their community, and as does other cities on the east side. So in the past, using the tools that we have at our disposal, they generally fall into three categories. One is the purple bar I show here is when just by allowing the market to build more diverse forms of housing, they on their own create housing that is at a lower price point than it might otherwise, by allowing multifamily housing, by allowing things along those lines. The second is the green section, which is the land use provisions. That's where you say, we let you build more, you do affordability, but you have to do a certain amount of affordability, and we're going to covenant to make sure it stays affordable over time. Accessory dwelling units we also put in that category because they almost are always affordable in the moderate income range. And then the light blue is looking at when the direct assistance. Donating land is another way cities have done direct assistance to general fund dollars. What this is showing you is that when we try to help the 50% and below, we almost always need to have direct assistance. We can't just use the market or those land use tools to get to that affordability level. It's really hard. A couple times we have, but not often. It takes that extra direct assistance because of the income level and the rents people can afford versus the cost of creating that housing. But when we do moderate income, all of these tools have worked. That all these different things of trying to get other players involved can help create diversity of housing and affordability in your community. What this graph is also showing you is we had some goals in the original set of plans that said our goal would be to build 445 affordable units to low income every year. We hit about 22% of that number in that first 20 years of ARCH's existence. We managed to get around 80% of the goal, or even higher, for moderate income, but with a couple caveats. One, and that was because we used all those different tools. And for Issaquah, your numbers look very, very similar. You got about, within Issaquah, through your efforts, you were right around 23, 24% of your low-income goal, and you were right about 90% for moderate income. What was different about you is you got more of your moderate through all those land use requirements up in the master plan developments. You got a lot through that. The other is that most of the stuff in moderate is rental housing. Not much of it's ownership. You do have some ownership. And so therefore, you might not be, you have it technically in the categories that are moderate, but it's not necessarily spread across the board of all these different needs we talked about in terms of rental and ownership or larger units versus more smaller units, especially for the market. The market rate units affordable to moderate income are usually smaller units that are built. And this is new production. This isn't existing. Okay? And so finally, this is the report card that staff does. And this is now going back to that countywide need, which is saying if we had a perfect world, every city would have 12% of its housing affordable to very low income, 12% to low income, 30 to 50% of median, and 16% to moderate. And what this is showing you is the cities at about, when you look at all housing, both the new and existing, you're at about 3%, 3%, and 15%. Okay? And then what I showed you on the bottom is the thing I just explained on the previous slide. This is what you did relative to your growth. And if you had done 24% of your growth, you would have been at 815, and you got about 24% of that number. You got 191. So this is just different ways of thinking about what have you accomplished over time and where do you look at today. And then my final two thoughts, and this is actually a slide that I think you saw from Trish, is this is the beginning of the matchup between here and here. What is your mix in terms of tenure? You've got condos, townhomes, and apartments, and then what's their mix in terms of size of units? And Trish already made some comments and observations from that, so I won't repeat those. And then finally is you have a certain profile of housing today, which is what the first column is. The second column is saying, what is the potential profile based on existing zoning? So that's saying that you can get about another 375 or so single-family homes, and the rest would be, you have some like low, mid-rise, or low, medium-density townhomes, and then the vast majority, in terms of your capacity under zoning, is that sort of the 3 to 5 story wood frame type buildings. And then so you can see, well, that's what we have today. This is what our projection would be. What does it look like when you put it all together? And that's what the last column is. And so whether or not the mix will be, this is showing no condos. That's because right now, the last few years, the market hasn't been building condos. Will that change in the next 20 years? We don't know. But right now, there's constraints to people building condos. So they're saying it may be primarily rental, is what they're implying. I've seen market shifts where sometimes it's all rental, then it goes condos and back and forth, but there are some constraints to that. So this is just sort of general overview of different ways of thinking about housing as you move forward on your overall strategy plan.
Any comments or questions or thoughts initially?
Why would condos be under pressure? Because I would expect as real estate prices go up, your demand for lower cost housing would go higher. Therefore, condos would be the first thing I would see increase.
Right, it should be happening now. There's a couple different, well, anyone have any ideas why we're not seeing condos built right now? There's a couple potential reasons.
A lot of people don't want high density, but I think the high density is already being planned, it just hasn't been built yet.
But what I also, if you look at that previous slide, you'll see, or that slide we had, a lot of condos were built. A lot, in fact, we were seeing about 30% or more of the multifamily housing built before the recession were condominiums. So there was a market acceptance for condominiums. So that's why I'm saying it's strange that we're, from a market point of view, from looking at this, everything says condos should be on the rise. Okay, they should be. And we are seeing very high-end condos being built, but we're not seeing the mid and lower price condos being built. And there's potentially there's 3 reasons why, actually.
Because the real estate, during the real estate boom, the condos took the hardest hit, and therefore it's more volatile?
That's very close. People who bought those are nervous about buying. Are nervous about buying. The millennials haven't gotten back on the home ownership market yet because they watched what happened. That's one of the theories that's out there, is that they prefer the flexibility and not, what if there's another housing bust? They don't want to go through that. So that's one of the ideas that's out there, is that the market's a little reluctant. The younger market's a little reluctant at this point in time to get back into ownership, kind of thing. So that's one of the theories.
Do people who want to own not want to be part of homeowner associations where the fees are going to go up?
No, because condos are out there. There's a lot of condos were built and were filled, and we're doing fine. They're out there. So I would say maybe, but we didn't have that before. Were you going to? Yes.
You made reference to the impact, the regional impact of our neighbors in Bellevue and how the housing decisions and marketplace there impacts us and vice versa. I'm thinking larger for a second. What are we dealing with in terms of neighbors to the northwest? The issues in BC, there's news stories about dollars coming from overseas and buying downtown Seattle now. Some of those things, how does that play in or not play in maybe?
Has anyone heard about how that's impacting East King County? I don't know if it's landed in Issaquah. It sure has landed in Bellevue. They buy the homes. They're not saying they might buy condos, but they're buying homes. Foreign money is increasingly buying single-family homes in our market area. So that's one thing we've seen. So the other is, the more subtle, is that there's liability issues with building condos that are different, and it's too much risk. So we're still seeing high-end condos built because there the margins are enough that they can deal with that issue and stuff, and they're also using non-wood frame construction. And so liability has been one of the things we've heard from the building industry, is it's too much risk for them in order to go into that market. And then the third reason is, with low interest rates and cap rates where they are, the economics of multifamily rental are working as well as they've ever worked for people who are developing. So you're normally right. your point was right on to say, gee, you would think condos would be able to outbid or whatever the land for over rental. And that's exactly what was happening in the early 2000s, is that renter developers couldn't compete on the land price. But right now, because of low interest rates and everything like that, they're on a more of a par from sort of the investor point of view. So those are three different, there might be others, but those give you some of the things that are out there. And so as a result, we're having an area that was being served, because the average size condo that's been built, and that was built in the early 2000s is probably as large as the average single-family home built in the 50s and early 60s. Because homes used to be really small when they were built. They were under 1,000 square feet. So in terms of living square footage, a condo isn't all that different than all those small homes we were building in the general market in the 50s and 60s. So it's sort of like they've become a new form of, but they're serving a similar need. So.
Great. All right. Lots of good information, and it really helps to provide a broader context because, as we know, we are within a region. So I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about the housing strategy and the process for the public outreach we're doing. So one of the key things we're doing is to hold some focus groups and to talk to individually, because obviously this is all these questions, you kind of start seeing the data and you start thinking about it. So we know that we want to hear the different voices in our community, and so we decided to do focus groups. And here's a list of the focus groups that we plan on doing at the end of from now until the end of the year. We have conducted 3 focus groups so far for the businesses and school district, and the rest will happen after this meeting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We plan this is our first of our joint 3 commission meetings, and we'll have another one in the beginning of next year in about January, February, to come together, provide the information that we've heard so far, and get your feedback and input. Then we plan on doing some neighborhood outreach, and so those are going to be broader communities for the community to come in and listen to the things that we've heard from the focus group. We plan on developing some themes to test out with the community and see, are these things themes that you feel are a good fit, things we should be addressing in our housing strategy. And then we'll also do an online survey, again, realizing there's multiple ways to get input from our community. So anybody can go, employees, employers, visitors, residents can go in and complete the online survey when we have that point. So you guys are on the ground floor of what we're doing here for this housing strategy. So as we go along, don't be shy about saying, I have an idea, have you thought about this? We're definitely looking to move this forward.
Question
Yes.
for you. Are we able, or will we be able to watch those focus groups?
Well, we actually had a commissioner from each of the commissions were invited to the focus groups. We invited the chair to them. And so we'll do it that way. The focus groups are meant to be smaller groups, and so we don't want to videotape them, or we want them to feel comfortable talking so far. But definitely in the future, for the future focus groups, if you have an interest in being in one of those, feel free to let your commission staff person know, and we'll definitely get you more information about that. So I think it's helpful, to hear the conversation. And really, you're sitting there and you're listening, and you can definitely contribute, but it's about listening and hearing and bringing that information back to the commission. So I wanted to first let you know, I work with the Economic Vitality Commission, and I want to give you a little bit, since we started off with the businesses, I wanted to give you a little bit of a context of what we know about our business community so far. We just conducted a 2016 business community survey, and as one of the results of that showed that Issaquah is a great place to do business, right? So we know that Issaquah is a great place to live. We've heard that a lot from our residents. Businesses also kind of have responded back, and so we did the same survey 4 years ago, and as you can see, the positive rate has increased. So that's great. So things are working well for our businesses. Obviously the worldwide recession is improving, but they are also liking to do business here in Issaquah. But we did ask them what things are working, what things are not working. And this is a bubble chart, a cloud, word cloud. Obviously, so the larger words, the ones that have responded more often. So no surprise, traffic is one of the concerns that businesses have here. Anybody have any comments about any of the other words up there that kind of surprise them, or affordable housing is on there, and that's something that's new, has kind of increased in our results from the last time. And I think that has a lot to do with them being able to attract and retain their workforce. Anything in there that surprises you or is missing?
Utilities, because gas prices have gone down, so I don't know how utilities would be,
Power outages, internet service, certain
Broadband,
locations.
fiber, the whole gamut of utilities, yeah.
Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm, right, yeah. So, so again, these are the.
Jen?
Yeah,
So when you say affordable housing recently popped up, meaning on the previous survey it wasn't there? Is that what you said?
I'm checking with our business survey guru back in the back, and yeah, she's shaking her head yes. So that was a new response that made it to this level, yes.
But looking at the size of the text, then I can see that it's maybe very low on the list.
It's at the lower end, but it's not like,
Okay.
one or two responses. And actually, if Andrea wants to chime in, there's a microphone right there.
You can repeat this for me.
You can, right there.
But affordable housing came up in other ways, and great. Thank you. Affordable housing came up in other conversations too with the businesses when asking about recruiting a workforce and what they saw their challenges were in terms of workforce availability. They cited affordable housing to be a concern because most of their employees couldn't afford to live in Issaquah, and that was a barrier to them for accessing talent. So we did hear about affordable housing in a couple different ways from businesses, and overwhelmingly much more so than in 2012.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
just to add on to that, would it be safe to assume that regarding the retention comment or turnover comment is because it's traffic too hard to get in here? Is that a safe assumption?
That's, yes.
Okay.
That's part of it, yes. And so, and we'll be talking about that, what we've heard in the focus groups in a minute. So, yeah.
And the distance from Seattle, was that at all related to the differential in pay scale?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
So then looking at what the businesses really liked about Issaquah, and if you look at this, it's really pretty much what residents also like, correct? So you talk about the natural beauty, the quality of life, accessibility, the close-knit community, historic downtown. So our business owners and employees are very much in line with why residents like to be here. So knowing that, we sat down and we had 3 focus groups in the last 3 days, and we met with large employers in one group. We met with some small businesses and the Chamber and the Downtown Issaquah Association in the next one, and then we also sat down with the school district in the third. And we're just kind of digesting that information now, but these are the general themes that we've heard in these focus groups, and I want to encourage any of the commissioners that have sat in those focus groups to chime in anytime they like along the way. So basically, the first one was about the affordability concerns in ownership and rental, and so I think we all know it may be challenging to purchase a home here in Issaquah, and we may have heard that it's also challenging for affordability for rental. But one of the things that they really brought out was that while we may think, oh, it's cheaper to rent than to own, is that the uncertainty of renting here, or renting actually anywhere in our region, is a detriment, because they know there's a fear that the rates will go up pretty quickly at their next lease turnover. And there was an anecdotal story of an employee who was recruited into the area. He was looking at the new apartment complex here, And there's a 3-month delay. I'm not sure if it was for his job or for the apartment community. And when he came back, it was a $500 increase in what he was quoted the first time around. So those are things as people think about what I'm going to do, where I'm going to live. So they are then, what business employers had told us is that, so then they decide instead of renting closer to work, if they feel like they have to go someplace to own, they have to go farther to actually purchase. So it actually encourages, there's less stability in knowing that, okay, I can afford rental now, but I may not be able to afford it in 6 months or a year when my lease comes up. Any additions or thoughts with that from folks? Okay.
People were moving further away to find affordable housing.
Yes, yes, right. And because of the rent, usually renting is kind of the easy way to afford a community, but the fear that you won't be able to afford it pretty soon encourages you to move out farther even quicker than you may normally want to go and own, and so it, yeah, pushes you out for a little farther. Then there's missing diversity of housing types, and I think Arthur talked a lot about this. Pretty much across the board, 2 bedrooms is what people want, whether it's a house or apartment or a condo. And I think the chamber executive director mentioned that she had heard somebody recently talk about how we thought that the baby boomers, as they were downsizing, the millennials would take over their housing, right? So I'm a baby boomer, my kids are gone, I want to downsize, the millennials will be starting to have families and go and move into those homes. Well, what's happening is they are all wanting to have either the smaller home or the condo townhouse that doesn't have as much yard work, so they can go enjoy life and have time for the things besides yard work. And as we look at what was being built in our last 10 or so years, it's not the 2-bedroom condo or house. If there's any place where there is a 2-bedroom house, it's very sought after. So people like the idea of accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, other things, but we don't see that as growing quickly in our community. We see the 3- and 4-bedroom homes that are being built. And now, a little bit uptick of the multifamily. Transportation, yes. So transportation is important. Getting people in and around town is, of course, challenging. And also, we had a lot of businesses who talked about shifting their start times in order to allow their employees to come in later to avoid that traffic. But then sometimes it didn't work because their clients needed them there at 8 or 9 o'clock. So some businesses that worked okay for, some didn't, and some weren't able to be that flexible. And so again, small businesses, large businesses are dealing with having not just affordable housing, but how do people get in and around? And they even mentioned about not even getting into the city and out of the city, but around the city during the day, and how challenging it is. One employer talked about how his employee who lives in Issaquah, I think is actually right outside Issaquah, he comes in on Issaquah Hobart Road. Sometimes he's the one that's late most often because of traffic. So we may think, oh, it's so hard to get from north or from other areas, but sometimes getting around the city can be just as challenging. So recruitment and retention of employees. So again, not having housing that they can afford nearby. One of our employers talked about that he may get a really good salesperson, and they're fine driving a little bit farther than they normally would. As soon as they get kind of some experience under their wings and they can transfer to another location that's closer to home, they're gone. So he's constantly kind of losing employees and having to start the team over, and then keeping employees. So we talked to the school district today, and they also talked about once they've been in the school district for a couple of years and get some experience, and if there's an opportunity to be closer to where they can afford to live, they usually take that option. And I think there's a lot of and that goes into the next one. There are a lot of reasons for the housing choices people make. And as you think about where you have chosen to live or where you have in the past, it's not just affordable housing, although that may be part of it, right? You may be making decisions based on all these things here. So who's the person that first got a job and where they moved from? What's most important to you? Do you prefer to be in a more open area? You want a more urban set area? I think one of the things that some of the employers talked about is that their young employees want to be close to amenities. So we think about the Bellevue or downtown, but they also like the outdoors. So Issaquah is attractive for that, and we are trying to add more of those amenities and more of those entertainment options so that people can go and feel like there's some opportunities in the evening to go out and enjoy themselves. And then, as Arthur also talked about, is that we asked them, because we know we can't solve all housing issues at once, right, here at the city. We're trying to really figure out where can we best have an impact. And again, this is 3 focus groups, so this is not the answer yet. But what really seemed to be key is talking to the employers is if we could provide some more housing opportunities for those who make between $40,000 and $60,000, that would really help them. Now, that doesn't mean that all their employees make between 40 and 60. That's a key area of their employees that would really help to keep them there, help them to attract other employees from other areas. And so that was just something, again, from 3 focus groups that we heard that was about in that range. Any questions or comments? Or anything that people would like to add who sat in those focus groups? So Joan joined us, Derek joined us, Christy joined us, Elizabeth was there as well. Thank you for doing that. Yes, Richard?
Where do the lower income employees in Issaquah live now?
I don't know that I know that. There are some low-income housing complexes or apartments here in or housing in Issaquah. I believe there's actually a map in your packet that shows those are the subsidized ones. Mm-hmm. In general, I think what we heard from employers is that they're not living in Issaquah.
Right.
They're living.
That's what I was assuming.
Oh, okay.
It's like Renton or Maple.
Okay. So we asked. Yeah, we did ask where they are mostly coming from, and south. So you're talking about Maple Valley, you're talking about Renton, you're talking about Kent, Auburn. Sometimes people talked as far away as the other side of Tacoma. Yeah, I think we had a
Black Diamond, Ellensburg.
Black Diamond, yeah, Ocean Shores for one person. But that was a nursing staff that actually could stay overnight. They worked 3 days in a row, and then so shift work. I mean, that was one of the things in a couple of our businesses, and not just the hospital, but shift work also allows. So if you're working for 3 days and you're off for 4 or 5. Maybe that drive isn't so bad, right? You're coming in and driving out on an odd shift. So again, that's more of the reasons for your housing choices. You may be fine with that, but I think our goal is to allow you the opportunity, if you want to live in Issaquah, to have that choice, right?
Hey, Jen?
Yeah.
And Arthur probably can answer this better. As a developer, you always have a hard time of saying, how do you make these pencil?
Sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, you got to be able to afford it. I've grown up in the area. I grew up down south as a kid, so I watched Sumner grow like crazy, and my dad commuted to Boeing. That's where you could afford to live. And I think for generations, it's always been that way. I mean, there's just certain income levels that have different areas to live, and unfortunately, it's just very difficult we're constrained by geographic challenges here. We've got wetland issues. We've got streams running underneath everywhere. To build something that can make it truly affordable in these numbers, mm-hmm. it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you make that work, and how do you incent developers to look at it and say, yes, this is going to work for us, mm-hmm. and we can develop.
Well, I think that's what we're hoping to, and I'll let Arthur come up and talk. I think he had one of those slides that talked about the tax credits or exemptions and fee waivers and those types of things. So if you have some other questions or answers, but that's one of the things we're looking at. So if we want to do that, what are our tools?
So I'm going to take the liberty to say there were 2 questions in there. One is sort of the historic patterns of some areas just have had lower, that lower cost housing and people commute. I think, I first lived here in the 70s, and you could commute from here to Seattle in 30 minutes or less. What's often a key issue for location is how long it takes. It's not necessarily what mode, it's how long does it take you to get to your job. And if you're spending an hour and a half, then it starts to be a burden. So sort of like, I've heard it's 20 minutes is the goal, but 20 to 30 minutes is when people are like, okay, whatever. And then, so if you drew a map back in 1970s and you said, what can you get to in 30 minutes? You'd see a different size circle than when you have that today. So the company that I work for in the Bay Area was formed by the business community where that was already happening, the same issue, and they were saying, we've got to find ways to get that time down. So we are going to create a company to build different cost housing, because otherwise we're worried about recruitment, et cetera, and we need a better balance in our community. So it's about time. I mean, it's about the issue of time and how that plays out for getting to work. Now, in terms of what do, that's what we're saying is the different strategies that we've had. Sometimes the strategies are how do you ooch the market within a normal market rate development. So that's where you allow more units, where some of them now come down to a different price point. And the two main tools that we use are more density, because land's an expensive component. So if you can get them more density, you're essentially got them free land. But instead of having all the units a little bit less, you say, let's take that extra density and have some of the units be at a lower point. The other is property taxes or fees, so you're taking costs away from the developer so that allows the math to work. The other is when we provide then direct assistance, that's usually also leveraging other subsidy sources. And so that's basically a different financing mechanism where the user of that, in exchange for not having to pay it back or having really, really low interest rates, gets to have certain amount of housing affordable. But when you combine your city resources with higher, state and county resources, that allows us to get all the way down to 30 and 50% of median, because it's just, like you say, it's all math and things along those lines. So a little bit of all of those factors are part of what you're saying, and that's one of the challenges. And then other times, like I said, the example in Redmond is, would somebody have built a 200 to 300 square foot unit 15 years ago here? No. But when they build it now, it gets filled. People sort of look at housing a couple different ways. One is what you'd like to have and what works for you, okay? And sometimes that second one, look at how many of you were when you were students, lived in something significantly small when you were doing that. How many of you were in dorms or something along those lines? You did that for how long? Maybe 4 or 5 years. So that's a need out there. And so the market, sometimes we as communities assume what is good housing. And we assume it over when we don't think about everybody. But some of the stuff we think isn't good housing for somebody else, maybe it works just fine. And so one of it is, and that's where I say the neighbors can come in and affect what happens, is do you let the market, how far do you let the market go to being creative in doing this kind of stuff? So those small units in Redmond, not a dime of subsidy, okay? He's getting more per square foot than anybody else, and his rents, though, are affordable at 55% of median income. They're really small, but there are enough people, and not all singles are going to do that, but he's found 300 people in Redmond who are willing to do it. So so all of those are parts to get at what you're asking.
Just to follow up on that, I think one of the other stats that might be interesting is to know how many people actually have vehicles and commute versus, is it a 1-car family, 2-car family, 3-car family, 6-car family? So
right.
Back to your micro units, who would have thought downtown Seattle you could build an apartment building with no parking at all?
Right. Right.
I would never do it, but other developers have figured out a way to do it.
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
So I do have another question.
Come
You
on
might
up.
have to go back to your slide that shows,
His slide?
his slide.
Yes.
That shows proportional need of low and very low. I thought it was like 13% or something, and we only have 3%. If you could go back to that, my question is that it?
That the right one?
It's a table, I thought.
It was one that showed the 3%, the 3%, 3%.
Okay, got it. I think you mean that one?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. So what I think I understand so far is that we have a proportional need, and my question is going to be, could you walk through that just again quickly on how that 12% is derived? But what I'm hearing is that we only have 3% compared to the 12%.
Right.
And then I see information from focus groups saying, yeah, we're having a little bit of a retention problem with our employees because it's too hard to get here and they have to live too far away. So it's hard for me to connect the dots that we're having a crisis, but I think, is it fair to say that we're seeing enough evidence that we do have a shortage of some sort? It's hard for me to get to the shortage you're showing in the table, 12% versus 3%. It seems like a huge gap.
Right.
But I'm not seeing evidence that that screams to me crisis, but I'm not seeing other evidence of,
Okay.
oh my God, I hear about it in Seattle maybe, but maybe not here in Issaquah. So
Okay.
can you cover again just quickly how the proportional need of 12% was derived?
So the 12% is saying that when we look at the county as a whole, and I kind of call that an economic area, that of all the households, 12% of the households earn 0 to 30% of median income. That's what their income is. And then another 12% have incomes between 30 and 50. And what's interesting is now we do this data all the time. This is census data, and they do it now on a rolling basis. But for most of my life, it was every 10 years they'd ask this question. And they always ask that question based on our peak economy years. You know how we've had our cycles? Our cycles of peak economy have coincided with the years of the census. 79, 89, right, 99. That's usually when our peak economy is. So what that is telling us is that even in a peak economy period, that's the profile of households' income. And it hasn't shifted. If anything, what's happened, you hear about the disparity of incomes, that incomes are sort of nationally more, that maybe the percentage has gone up a little bit of the very low income and low income relative to, and then it's gone down a little bit in the middle and then has gone up a little bit at the high end. But generally speaking, this is the percentage distribution we get from the economy of King County. Now that's why I made the point about, well, that's King County's economy. We have higher median income here. But that's of the people who live here. That's why I made the point earlier, your profile of your jobs in this community, and we have a chart that we've done that shows the profile, how many jobs are at different income levels. Your profile is very similar to the countywide averages. If anything, you're a little bit lower. So that would imply that from your workforce, you are probably generating households that is a mixture that's not that dissimilar than these countywide figures. Okay, so that's where that's coming from. Now, you say, where are the numbers? And you're right. And I showed it two different ways because we've kind of changed how we look at it. This middle chart is looking at overall housing supply, which is how we're asked to sort of think about it now. What we were asked to do from 1992 until this year, so almost 25 years, is take it as a percentage of your growth. We're not going to make you think too hard about all the existing inequity. Let's just try to deal with the growth component, each city. And so that's where we're showing you numbers here, that you would have created 815, based on your growth targets, you would have created 800 units that are affordable up to 50% of median, and you created 191. You would have created 540 units affordable between 50 and 80, and you actually created 477. And that's where I'm saying now's when you really start getting in the strategy plans. You heard the comment from the employers saying stuff. Well, probably very little of that housing is ownership. It's almost all rental, and it's mostly probably smaller rental. But there is a certain amount that is, because for you at least, you did have the requirement in Issaquah Highlands and in Tallis that they had to do, a lot of the developments included it, and they had to have the same unit mix as the rest of the development. So you probably have a better mix than most cities within this moderate range of meeting a wider range, because you have ownership units in there, which very few cities have any of in this 477 figure. But you did get that through that intentional activity, okay? So it's important to also start looking at this chart, because in a healthy housing market, first-time home buyers, when you get to 70% of median income, you should be able to start thinking about, maybe I could be a homeowner, okay? That's if you look at historic, nationally and stuff, That's about the income level where, I should be able to save a little bit. I should lower priced ownership homes in a healthy market where you want people moving through from being renters to owners and then up to scale. That's where you ideally want to start having some housing affordability for ownership.
Thank you.
So could you go to slide 13? Because I think the other side of the coin is, well, how much does it cost us to create these units? And
Great
so
point.
you mentioned if sort of it's the moderate income segment, the 40 to 60K that was what the initial survey said was the gap. And it looked like we were successful relatively on the, if I'm looking at the right-hand side of the chart and that on the past. Do you have a sense for how much that costs the community or the
Great.
city or the tax base?
Great question.
And before you answer it, I think the other important thing that I'm thinking about is in the context of, hey, part of all the complaints about traffic are because people can't live here. So there's as many people trying to come in as there are people that live here going out. So if you could live and work in the same community, and we're putting up bills with substantial price tags on that side to solve something, this is kind of, as I see it, very linked in that if you provided different solutions, you might have fewer people commuting, which would be a different way other than trying to build more roads or improve the roads we have to reduce traffic and kind of help everyone out.
A quick note on that front is in California, they've figured out in the Bay Area that they get more bang for their bucks in some circumstances to use transit dollars to build housing right next to transit stations, because the people who live in that housing are going to use transit versus other roads, and they've actually found they get more. The amount of ridership they get from doing that is as high as it makes up for the cost of building the housing. Now, but going to your other question about the cost here, which is a great point, and that is that the purple bar, now, the answer to that question depends also on who you're asking. It's not the same for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to give an illustration of that in a minute. So theoretically, the market doesn't cost the public anything per se, but some people would say, but I need all these roads that need to get built if I let there be more housing built. So, right, so there can be different ways of looking at that. There is no capital housing outlay per se, but now you've got a city with people if you use it, if you have diversity of housing. Now that may or may not be the case, but diversity of housing theoretically is you're letting the market play without any direct intervention other than what you allow get built. The green section typically doesn't have a direct monetary expense, but this is definitely one where there might be considerations of maybe there are costs, because if you're using more density to allow that to happen with some of that being affordable, some people will say there's pluses and minuses to that extra density, but there isn't a cash outlay per se, okay? So for the green and the purple bar, a lot of those don't have a direct capital outlay. Now, the light blue bar is definitely a direct capital outlay of one form or another. It can show up as property tax exemptions, so you're foregoing tax revenue. Now, some people will argue, but sometimes that's getting stuff built that's paying other forms of taxes that aren't otherwise generated, and so therefore, while you're not getting one tax source, you're getting the sales tax from the construction, you're getting the sales tax from the retail if it's built on the ground floor, if it gets built, that sometimes there's other forms of taxation that can help offset or at least help make that decision. But again, there's a debate back and forth there. So it's that, land donations. So if you have surplus land, you don't need it for any other public purpose, can you use that land? And if you do you make it available at some kind of discount? Now, I got my living going building on surplus school properties. I didn't get a nickel off because they're saying that's a public benefit. We need the money from the land. So we can't give that up. So there's a trade-off there of that money from a land sale could be used for some other purpose. But sometimes just having access to land. So we made a living doing affordable housing even when we paid market value because no one else would even talk to us. At least the school districts were willing to talk to us and try to get us the land because they saw we were building housing affordable to their teachers maybe. So there's, now one of the things I say, because everyone says, well, you're an affordable housing people, why do you care about housing? And this is the chart that tells you why. Because there is no way there's enough money, and there never has been in this country, to direct assist everywhere where if you just let the market do it on its own, that gap between what the market does with nothing versus direct subsidy, there's just not enough money. So the better job every community does in allowing that purple and green bar to work, then with that light blue, your resources part, you can serve the hardest to serve need. And still, by doing all three, there's a wide range of needs in your community. Again, my premise always is, this is your goal. And that includes, like I said, Bill Gates, as well as the person with no income who's homeless and standing on the side of the road.
Addressing cost, we have to look not only at the cost of providing housing, but in that discrepancy area between the 12% and the 3%, we have to look at the cost of not having housing. That's the 109 homeless school children, the people who are packed in like sardines into very small homes that they're trying to share because there's nothing left. Some of the cost of not building the housing is that we have people who draw on the community for a whole lot of needs that they wouldn't have if there were housing.
So to that point, there's two words that when I'm trying to do this, and I look at the world, when I'm working on housing, I look at the world from the point of the builder, and I look at the world from the point of the community, and the existing and the people who are having challenges. And there are two words that stand out to me when I'm trying to think about that. The first word is for the builder. There's a 4-letter word that dictates the life of a builder. Anyone know what that 4-letter word is? Risk. Okay? That shapes, that if you want one word to define so much, the company I work for, we worked with for-profit developers and partnered with them, and the whole thing we did is we said, how can we reduce risk in exchange for them giving us affordability as a partnership? And there's so many ways that plays out: time, costs, market conditions, market profile. The word for the community is stability, okay? That communities can be more stable if they have a more diverse form of housing. And the stability is for those people who are struggling, but it's also for the broader community. People don't get insurance because they can't afford it because they're doing it all in housing, so you have uninsured people out in the community. That's just sort of one kind of example. But part of this is if you create stability for families, it creates stability for a community as a whole. And there's lots of different ways that can play out. So the example with homeless is if they have a home, they're not using the emergency services, which costs a ton of money when they're constantly in the hospital or high-cost services. And if you can get them in housing, they don't cost that as much. So we can save, Seattle has a study that for one place they built, saves thousands and thousands of dollars per year per person, because if they're on the street, they're constantly going into emergency services, which cost a lot because they have no insurance.
And the high stress makes it harder for them to be productive.
Well, and that's right. So if people are commuting an hour and a half each way, how well are they doing do you get a full 8 hours out of them or not? Or is it 7.5 and some days 7? Those are all different kinds of things that, potentially you think about.
What percentage of the need for affordable housing do you think we can achieve under some reasonable plan moving forward?
That's a great question, and that's something you're going to grapple a little bit more with.
All right, do you think we can actually move the needle?
There's sometimes I look at stats for East King County and I go, wow, we're getting really hit hard by the really fast rising market rents, because that's taking the overall supply of housing and making it less affordable. So if that bar doesn't, that chart, if we don't see the kind of corrections that we've seen in the past here, if we get that correction, we get back down to here, it's been in a high cost area here. Sometimes when I look at the numbers, I can almost say, wow, we didn't necessarily move the needle way up, but we didn't go down and we didn't go backwards, which in an area with a booming economy is sometimes an accomplishment. It hasn't gotten, certain things I look at, it hasn't gotten worse. But that's something you guys are going to have to grapple with as we talk about strategies, because you can see to get more done, there are choices the community needs to make about what they're willing to try to do to create that diversity. And the question becomes, how far do you want to go trying to achieve that?
Well,
But you did get to 24% and 100. When you looked at the growth projection approach, you can see some numbers of, relative to some numbers we were working with, how well we did.
how do we control rent in a manner, because in capitalism, it's whatever the market will bear. So if rent is going up $200 a year and people are willing and able to pay that, then that is hence the market rate and it's sustainable. To make it affordable, how do you actually control the rent then? If we build affordable housing, let's say we do 500 units of affordable housing out on the valley, how do we keep it from going beyond the means of the people who are living in them?
So one thing this chart shows you is that rents have a tendency, if you take economics or those kind of things, they call it liquidity or whatever, that fast reaction to conditions in the market. And this is why this is so surprising to me, is because the rental market income profile isn't all that different. So why has this happened? Why didn't the market force a correction already? And I don't know if it's because the jobs housing ratios got to a point where the supply only allows so much. So some people would say supply and demand. If you're going to generate jobs, then generate more housing. And if you generate more housing, that will help skew this. I do guarantee you, right now, you literally have to pay a reservation fee. This came up yesterday, right, in one of the interviews. You have to pay for the right to even submit an application now. Does not go towards your first month's rent. If you don't rent the unit, you don't get the money back. They're doing that, and they're not alone in your town. We're seeing this around this region. Now, at this point in time, it probably felt the same. At this point in time, you got your first month's rent free. Okay? We won't see that forever. There will be some correction at some level. But some people would argue it's supply and demand. So one is supply, and the other is you can do a Detroit. Okay? I mean, that's another part. I mean, that's part of the reality of housing markets is Detroit used to have some of the highest housing costs in this country back in the boom of the auto industry. So if jobs were to go away, that would have a big impact. Now, we're all hoping that doesn't happen. That's why things like this do happen, right? This one is attributable to the dot-com, bust, right? We had jobs go down in our region, so rents went down. So that's why it's not a perfect answer, but some people argue to some extent it's supply. So you need to have supply that's somewhat proportionate to your demand, your workforce, and at some level. Some people resort to rent control. Now, that's not a common approach, and in this state, it's not even an allowed approach. But some areas have said, we're going to go that far with it. Not the typical American economic system, and it's not one that I've ever worked within or have preached or anything. It's just that, yeah, you're right. Your point is well taken, is you're not, that's a really important thing to keep in mind as we're doing a strategy. You can't guarantee any result overall in housing unless we completely change our housing, how we do our housing market. Because most of our housing is done through the private sector, and conditions impact them. If interest rates all of a sudden go up to 7 or 8% versus the 3 to 4% now, that will have a huge impact on what happens with housing. And this, both ownership and rental. So there's so many things that you as government aren't acting. It's not like parks where you say, we want 10 acres, this is how much money we need, we're going to do it. It doesn't work that clean, because you are going to rely on a lot of other players and all the different factors that impact them. Developers are bankers. Our financing is huge for what builders can do on a lot of different fronts in a lot of different ways. So that's one of the challenges in this conversation, is I can't give you a guaranteed answer on what, if you do this, you'll get that answer. It's sort of what setting do you get so that where will you be relative to other players out there or other cities?
what can be done to enforce a change in the numbers when a developer applies for a permit to build in an area? I mean, talking about Issaquah, to increase the percentage of affordable housing within the mega number of housing that they're gonna build.
So that's the primary thing that you and other cities have done, is require at least some percentage that's not just pie in the sky. You can't just say, I want it to be 30% at 50% or 24% at 50 because that's what our needs say we want. Then it's gonna make it the economics, whoever said all the things about economics not work. So but you do that as a starting, that's one thing that a lot of cities have done, is say we want a certain percentage at a certain affordability price.
So I recently read that there's a permit, and out of the, I can't remember the numbers, of all the housing, it was gonna be one affordable house, and it was gonna be given to a firefighter or some kind of, you know,
right?
Employed person.
Right.
But what about those that are homeless or that don't have the income of a firefighter? I mean, we need to put a stop and push a little bit more for those affordable houses.
So that's
If
where.
we're gonna allow them to build in our city.
Right, and so the general premise has been that within the market, you're not trying to dictate that level of affordability. That requires such low rents that it's unreasonable to ask the private sector, who has lots of costs to buy land and build it and manage it and everything. It just doesn't correspond. And so that's where we use the direct assistance to work with people saying, if we can you're not gonna have a lower cost, but if we can cover a lot of the costs for covering that cost with subsidies, et cetera, then we can ask you to have really low rents. And that's where for your numbers, when we go back to that chart, you did manage to get 400, you've got 200 units that are priced at under 50% of median, and some are as low as 30%. Some have Section 8, which means it's any income and you can afford to live there. So to get to that level, that's where the direct assistance tools have to come into play. And so that's trying to attract federal and state dollars, because this country has believed that we need to supplement the market. And often those kind of dollars don't land in communities like yours because the costs are high. So the cities have used their resources to say, we'll help take some of the edge off the higher costs here so that we can help people who are going after that state and federal money.
So you stay here, stay here. So one of the things that it's really tempting to do is to try to figure out how we can fix this. But we are in still the stage of figuring out the needs, right? And so we wanted your role to help us. So one of the things that was your homework was to figure out what piece of information was confusing, what piece was really good, because when we go out and talk to the focus groups, when we go out and talk to the open houses and the community and broader, we want to make sure that the information, it makes sense, it rings true, it kind of provides some context. So, I mean, we could talk all night about how we can fix this, and that will be our next step, right? Our next conversations. So is there anything that of the data you saw, or that you have more questions about, or that you think is important for us to share? Are there needs? Are there things that we are missing with this? Anything else that we kind of need to be able to go and help us inform the further conversations? And believe me, we will be back, and we will, not that we will have the answer, but we'll have more information so that we can help, and you can help us grapple through what can we do. So is there anything else, Arthur, that we need to, I know that you need to leave at 8. Okay.
Right, let's start with that.
Yeah. So is there, of the information you saw, is there anything, again, that sticks out?
Yeah, I would like to see some of the same data on the communities where we think that the lower income workers are coming to work in Issaquah, like Renton, maybe North Bend, Victoria, I don't know.
Sure, and we do actually have data where people are traveling from, so, and we had that in our economic vitality strategic plan, so we can pull that data. I'm not sure if it goes into the income levels, but it gives you a better idea. Sure.
Okay.
Actually, I'd like to see a breakdown of the types of rental units that we have in terms of luxury condominiums versus what everybody else can afford.
Okay, so.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So are you saying multifamily, what are rental, what are owner, and then price points for both? Or is that what you're asking?
So we have a lot of luxury condominium units that are being built.
Right.
And when I see your averages, is that a weighted average or is that actually a straight average? Because luxury can actually skew those numbers
Right.
substantially.
So you will see in that report, and we can highlight, this is helpful to us because the report's big and fat. So let's hone in on what ones most stand out to you. So we do have information on the profile of the pricing of both rents and ownership housing. And I can't remember for the ownership, we know if it's condo or single family. So is that what you're sort of asking for, is understanding?
The volume of units that are on the market for rent.
Right.
What portion of those are considered luxury and what are considered?
And I don't use the term luxury, I'll say how many have units with rents over 2,000 versus how many have rents between 1,500 and 2,000. I mean, we can give you several cross profiles.
That works.
So that gets at it?
Will you also be breaking it out by number of bedrooms?
We'll have to do some research to see what it takes to be able to have the price point breakout also be done on a unit size. That sounds like a crosstabs is what they call it, and I'm not quite sure how readily available, but we'll check that.
Since we have some information that there's a particular number of bedrooms that's the preferred thing,
Right.
It would be helpful.
We'll
Thanks.
look into that.
So one of the things that I think we've seen, if we go back to the notion of supply and demand for our specific community, I think we owe it to ourselves, and hopefully I'm not complicating the issue too much, but there's been a lot that has changed in our region and in our economy in the last 5 years. And so I think it's really important to think about things like climate refugees, the tech sector growth, and also foreign capital investment or foreign individuals who are coming to live and work here too, because we might hit the needle for our community specifically, but if we're not aware of the forces that are around us, I think we might miss that. So I think having that conversation and understanding the data from a big picture is important. And so I think that is a key to understand. And then I also think if it's possible to understand what the 2015 census data is telling us, I think that it might tell a potentially different story than what we saw in 2010, if you also look at it in context of the Great Recession. So there's been a lot of ebbs and flows since that point in
So
time.
that's where we want to ask you, I'm not going to redo that whole big report.
I don't expect
So which
you
are the
to.
pieces of data that getting that updated information you think would be most helpful?
I have to-
And if you don't have it, if you have an answer right now, I'll take
I
that. But
don't.
also, that's what we need to hear from you, is, because we do update some of our data, but we can't afford every year to update all the data.
I
But
totally
we're
get
more
it.
than happy for key data. There is certain data we do every year, and you may already, and so there are certain things we are tracking, like rents. We track rents every year. We track ownership prices every year. So there are certain things we are tracking on a very regular basis, but it'd be helpful to know what would help you.
I have one. I think just if we're trying to fill out that grid, it looks like the household data type data is 2010. So if there's an update on that, given those changes, that might be one that would be important.
And I'll just let you know, we're seeing, what I've seen in the communities in East King County is when I first showed up here, you were kind of different than countywide averages, and more of the cities are looking more and more like the countywide averages. And we're now seeing stabilization in the household mixes and not seeing as big a shift as we saw like in the 90s, where cities over here had more families with children, and now you have less. It's not like it's still going down. You sort of hit the plateau, but we'll double check that. Okay?
I also have another question about rents. Do you also take into consideration homeowner fees?
When we do pricing of ownership units, in the data that's probably in your back, we do not. When we talk about affordability and what's affordable, we do. But I'm not sure there's always a direct correlation, because in the census data, I'm not sure how much the census gets into that. So that is, we do know if it's multifamily, and therefore you have a sense of what they are in general. But I don't think the census explicitly calls it out, but it's a great point, and it is something when we design programs, we're very conscious of, because we do consider that a housing expense.
I'd be more interested in the cost burdened and severely cost burdened categories, and if that's increased or if people seem to be stretching themselves or being more conservative.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, are we tracking how many people in these different income brackets are staying in our community? I'm thinking of the explosion of growth that we've seen through the census data, and I'm curious if we're tracking how these income levels are staying or moving in and out of our community and at what rates.
So we do know the profile of the incomes in your community, and that we can update every year. Is it due to who's moving in or some are moving out? That we don't know from the data we have. We can only look at the overall mix. And I'm not sure that's really getting at your question. And I'm not sure how we would get it sort of being able to track what's causing the change in profile of incomes.
I'm curious if people moving in and out of our community is different than that for our neighboring communities, considering how much growth that we've had. I want to know how much of that is sticking around in the more traditional sense of how our community used to be a few decades ago, or if that increase of population has been more transient and is moving through into neighboring communities.
That's a research issue that I'm not sure how, but I'll note it down and
Okay.
I'll challenge ourselves to see if there's some way to get at that issue. But I don't know if that's an anecdotal is what we'll find, or if there's something else that gives us any clue on that. But that's an interesting question. But I'm going to let you know up front, that's a challenging one.
Okay.
Is there a way to look at, for our current state, how long people have lived here?
Yes.
Okay.
You can look at length of residency overall, right, because that is something that is asked in the census data.
That would be interesting to know.
Okay.
Sorry, Jeff. I'll cut you off.
Go for it.
Do we have the length of time that they're renters? I think that was kind of the question that John was hitting on is, do they rent for a certain amount of time then could buy? Or are they long-time renters? So is there anything that shows the life cycle of the renters in our community, of how long they rent for?
And that's, again, like I said, that would be, you'd call a couple property owners, and my guess, is your profile different than other cities? I'm not sure. I would assume that's the case, but that would be a matter of calling some property owners, and they'd give you their anecdotal information. I don't think that there's enough correlation to specific households in the data that's typically out there, so it would be that kind of process. So I'm trying to think if there's a question I should ask you to sort of help better understand that question, to see if there's another way to.
What I'm trying to get at is understand the life cycle of the community. As our community gets more expensive to live in, those with families and kids, they're going to move out of the area. And then who's going to take over those larger houses that are going to have families and kids in here? But that's a bigger issue on the east side altogether.
Right.
Because this was an affordable community when I moved here 20 years ago, and now it's not. So you're starting to see, people moving in the area, they have 2 kids, they're going to the great school system, and then the ones, when their kids are done, the last one leaves, they either move to the Highlands or they're moving to Phoenix.
Right.
So, it's kind of I'm just trying to get at what's the inventory going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
So that, you've raised a question I often raise with cities when they're doing their comp plans, which is, I grew up in a town that is totally what happened. Very few people stayed. We were actually a 3rd-generation family, but nobody else was. And that was intentional. Okay, when you're done with school, move on. We got a great school, let people move in. And one of the questions because I've been here since 90, asking the question, and this is the question in Sammamish, because they're 15 years ago, is do you want, most communities on the east side start out very family heavy, mostly a lot of single family, and then it starts infilling, and the question is, do you want housing options for people to be able to stay in their community other than staying in their home? And that's and so you can consciously decide, we're not going to even try to accommodate it. And that, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. You know, certain cities land on, that's not what we're about. And so the question I always ask the community is, do you want choices? So like Bothell created a senior overlay zone next to their senior center, and they now have hundreds and hundreds of senior housing units that were built all around their senior center, okay? And that was a conscious decision, kind of thing. And they did an overlay where senior housing totally made more value for land than what was the underlying zoning. So landowners waited till the senior people came around and wanted to build senior housing. So the question is understanding what you do have for senior housing, does that feel like proportionate, or do you need, you know, should you encourage more of that? So that's the kind of question a city can ask.
I appreciate that, and because that's kind of the heart of the matter here, as I've been grokking in my head as to what is the problem statement here we're trying to solve.
Right.
'Cause I didn't see it on a slide, actually, problem statement. I get it with, after all this data, which is an amazing amount of data, it's hard to boil it all down into a story that people can understand, meaning, okay, the problem is we don't have enough low-income housing. Just saying that, you're going to have a lot of people disagree with that. But then back that up with this, you know, no one's going to read a 40-slide, you know, deck to figure that out.
Right.
They need a bullet point as to, well, here's why it's a problem. And which I get there eventually, but it's hard following, you know, it's hard to get there, and it's hard to, a little bit to believe. And so to your comment about the senior citizen thing, that was a conscious decision. It's kind of like, well, I think the city council has taken a decision that, okay, well, we do want low-income housing. I think that's what they're saying. We need more of it. That is a decision they've made, or that is a conscious decision that they've made or not made.
I guess, how do you think that they made that decision?
I'm asking, actually.
Oh, you're asking if they have. No, we're doing this housing strategy right now to determine.
Determine if it's a problem or not.
And when you say low income, I mean, again, we're talking about income affordability across the range.
Right, we're talking about, actually, if you look at the numbers, about 600 units we're short.
For.
And the numbers can be even interpreted differently if you look at overall, but.
Is that about right, though, about, you know?
If you look at from that time period and how we measured needs back then, correct. That is correct. Now, but let me can take your point, and because you've made some really, really important points, and it's almost like you set up the last question here. Because to me, I agree that if you can boil it down to, and I saw we were using the term vision. What's the vision of what you want your community to have, and calling out areas where you think you may not be achieving things for the housing. In other words, what would create a good balance in your community, however you think that feels. And it isn't low income. To me, that's not a word. To me, I'd rather hear things like what you said, types of households in particular, because if I say and income level. So that's where you see what the employers are saying. For us, it's 40 to 60,000 would be really helpful. And we would like to see some 2 bedrooms and stuff. So we're trying to have you as a community do exactly what you're saying, using terminology that makes sense to you. And so that's why I put this up here, is I was hoping this might make it a little easier for you to talk about where you want to go by talking about types of households and income levels. And then once we get that identified, then we'll start thinking about, because you'll say, oh, wow, if that's what we're doing, which of these tools, where should we try to plug in tools to help get there?
Right. And this is very complex, and I appreciate the work being done here. It's, and what I get from it is that, well, first of all, most people in this community are not business owners, right?
Exactly. Yep.
They're driving to Redmond or Seattle or Bellevue, you know. So it will be hard for people to, without you know, pretty shirt sleeve English saying, hey, this is a problem and why for some local business owners. You know, we need a few hundred more units for people can work here. And by the way, you do that and you're going to solve a little bit of the traffic problems. But, and that story makes sense to me, more, you know,
So
in
if
a
we
way.
can piece together 4 or 5 more stories like that, that would help a lot. So we only did the business not because we think that's the primary driver. It's a big driver.
Well,
That's
I'm
who
on the
we've talked to
Economic
so far.
Vitality Commission, so that's where my head's
Right.
coming. I'm
And
like,
that's who we've talked to so far, but we're going to talk to other players in the community and you. So that's a good example, though, what we gave you of the kind of stories we're looking for from you. Now, we're ready, if you have thoughts on that right now, of, you know, thinking about, we've started talking about the seniors a little bit. You know, we would like to see housing for seniors who are on fixed income be able to have options that are attached or with service. You know, those are the kind of stories we're looking for. And we'll try to match up data to help document why that might be important or not. But to some extent, you live in this community. The stories we're telling you about up on here are probably reinforcing things you probably already have in your heads or know about. And so the better we can do of telling a story in a way that not only you but the broader community gets, the more likely it will be that, oh, then let's do something about it.
and to Ethan's point, you can tell the story, but then put the price tag next to it.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, I like what he said about the vision statement, so you got me kind of thinking. You're asking us basically to come up with a vision statement. What do we want our affordable housing vision look like moving forward?
Take one word out of there, affordable. That's a part of your housing vision. That's not the focal point alone.
Okay, so you want, what do we want our housing vision to look like moving forward?
Yes.
That's the.
Yep.
And then, so we come up with what we like it to look like, and then you'll come up with the solution on how to get it.
We'll come up with ideas. No. We're going to come up with ideas for you to think about to see if they're worth solutions in your community. Okay?
Well, I have
We're going to give you some options.
I have an idea I've been baking for a while, and I was actually going to talk to City Council about it. But one of the thoughts was open up a program with first responders, where the city could go in and pay a portion of a house or a condo if they purchased. And then we would have ownership stake in that property, so when it comes time to sell, we would get the proceeds, the profit of that portion. Is that the kind of solution that you're looking for us to come up with, kind of ideas?
That is definitely the kind of ideas that can be put out there, yes. And that's a little more outside the box, but that's, you know, we can be in the box and out of the box. Right, exactly. And I have to run to another city to have a similar conversation with their planning commission. So Jen will be here to help keep the conversation going, but I'll be back on the other as you move forward, and appreciate all your questions and comments tonight. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I could take a
Yeah, go for it.
crack at a very vague, but maybe something to get us started on a vision statement. I think for me, there's something around I'd like our housing mix to better reflect the mix of people that actually work here. It doesn't have to match it exactly, but it seems pretty far off that sort of people that work here generally can't afford to live here was my takeaway.
Yeah,
And
right.
it seems like it's gotten worse. And so to me, it's, you know, if there's something about stability in a community, if everyone that works there like leaves it when the sun goes down and everyone that lives there comes back, that just seems like not maybe the,
That's good.
you know, just in a very kind of idealistic sense, not my picture of a community.
Right.
Well, I think you have to temper that somewhat with, we have an inordinate retail presence for our for the population, so we're never going to come near.
Yeah, I said
that.
better, not exact.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Anna?
When
Or
you
at least not
mentioned the
worse.
focus groups that you're gonna have, you know, the business, school districts, service providers, youth, seniors, and realtors, have you thought of how to target a broader community participation with several languages and interpreters? that would bring their cultural background ideas and their specific needs, because sometimes we're missing some links.
That's a great idea.
In the whole puzzle.
That's a great idea. I think we will hit some of that with the service providers, and we also talked a little bit with the school district, but I think that's not on our current list, but that's definitely a great idea.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ethan.
I've got another one.
Okay, good.
I'm taking another shot based on Richard's feedback. So I think the other one would be, if you think about a community, it's a place where people can grow up and live and potentially when they, finish school, maybe stay. It doesn't seem like that's realistic for someone leaving our wonderful schools at this point in time, right? Unless they're, winning the lottery in terms of the job market, which some will, but a lot won't. It seems like you kind of have to leave as a recent high school grad or even a recent college grad. So a mix of housing that allows people to, be born, live, and grow old here.
So any
in some
stage of life.
proportion. Yeah, not that they have to, but
There's an opportunity.
allowing for that.
I kind of disagree with that, though.
That's okay. That's why
okay.
we.
This is what a
I
conversation's
kind
about.
of think of Issaquah as a bedroom community. You come here for great schools, and I am not going to stay here after my kids graduate. So,
Okay. And so,
and I'm not looking for housing to stay here, actually.
But if I might,
but
what if
I
your kids
appreciate
wanted to? Would you want them to be able to have the option to?
My kids don't want to live near me, no.
well, maybe when you move to Arizona, they can live here.
But anyway,
Yes.
this is the kind of discussion
Yes.
that would,
Yeah.
can go on forever, but it's definitely healthy to have because people have an idea about, where they live and their town and why they live there and what it could be, should be. So I'm not disagreeing
Right.
or anything, really. I'm just saying I'm not sure there's going to be that's why we vote for people to come in and make a decision, to help represent us all. So it's going to be hard, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think you are representing our community in this conversation as well. And so you're helping to shape it. Doesn't mean you're helping to completely decide it, but you're helping us as staff. We're coming with data, we're coming with some experience from other voices, but we're hoping that the combination of who we have here tonight helps us, again, to make it match and make it fit our community.
One of the things that gives the community character is a sense of history. And when I moved here, there were still a great many families who were sort of like the pioneer families of the area. And I think it would be a great loss to the community if their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren were not able to stay in the community, because we lose a sense of who we are and who we've been if families aren't able to stay for generations.
Sure. Again, I think it's a choice, right? Like you said. So I agree. This conversation can probably go on for another 4 hours. And so one of the things I want to be cognizant of time. It's a little after 8, and we have public comment yet. Are there any other comments, burning comments? What I think we're going to do is actually send you out some questions to think about and respond to. Again, this is a conversation. This is the beginning. This is the opportunity, and we can talk about having additional meetings. We plan on having one in January, a special meeting again of the 3 commissions. We have to figure out schedules, but we're looking about the 3rd or 4th week of January. But if there are things that you'd like to have smaller conversations with or other things, let us know. There is going to be, again, focus groups, and we'll look to have a representative from the commissions at those to, again, inform and help share with your other commission members. So is there anything else that you want to share tonight? Yeah, Anna?
Can those slides be made available so we can
yes.
refresh the information?
Yes.
And
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
One last, as far as the focus groups,
Yes.
do we have any high school kids that would be involved in that focus group?
There's a youth group? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, so,
Nice
and
to
if
hear
you
that.
know anybody who we should include, because a lot of it is about having the right people in the room, right? So you want about 5 to 7 people who have an interest, and you're pulling out information, but that have an interest. Now, they don't have to be advocates, experts, whatever, but you want them to have a story to tell, or kind of some information that would be helpful to our stories, to our process. So if there's somebody that you think should be in one of those focus groups, please let the staff person know, and we'll make sure that we reach out to them. So, Okay, so we will send you some more homework, and we appreciate the conversation today. It's just the beginning. You'll get, and actually, I think Arthur's slideshow actually has more data beyond the 17 slides he shows. So when you get it, check it out. It has 2 blank slides, and then you'll have some more information to look at. And we'll make sure, we'll actually probably maybe post that so then people can access as well. And so we can go right into public comment.
Just
yes.
one more question.
Yes.
Did your big business focus group include developers, real estate agents, and those people you've listed over there? I think we need a
Yeah.
focus group with them.
We do plan, and actually, once we have some of the strategies, we think that's a better place to get their feedback on it, because it's just realistic, right? We may sit in this room and we may have as many conversations and look at data, then we need to have some of that. And we do have some of those people in our room here in our Economic Vitality Commission, but yes, we think they're definitely play a role in that. And we do have a real estate brokers group as well, realtors, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? So is there any public comment? Yes, Keith, come up.
It's on my computer. My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive, Issaquah, Washington. And I also was a member of the Central Area Task Force. And part of the vision that we heard from the community then was there was a desire back then of people to be able to age in place and to be able to downsize and age in place. And part of the strategy we had was that's why we saw mixed use would allow you to, with that mixed use, have apartments and smaller places that were above grocery stores, restaurants, schools, that would allow people to age in place. I personally would love to age in place, but I can't stay here. It's totally outpriced itself. And in my lifetime, I'm not sure we're going to get affordable housing so I could stay. But I know in talking with the police, Bob Porter said he only had 2 of his officers that lived in town. The rest couldn't afford to. I know with the schools, one of the decisions that they make on whether they're going to open schools or not if the roads are bad is how bad are the outlying areas, because the majority of our teachers all live extremely long distances from here. A lot of the school bus drivers live a little bit closer because they're older and they can afford to live here or have homes right now, so they can get there. But that's not the issue. It's can the teachers get to school? Because they can't open the schools if they don't have enough teachers to open up the school. So that's another issue, is they can't afford to live here. One of the projects that I've talked about before is the greenhouse project, which is a totally different concept of housing than what was talked here tonight. But those are little cottages that may have just little cottages with one central kitchen. That is a national and beginning to be international way of allowing older people or people single to live in a little community and have a community. And so that's where you need to look at maybe changing policies. I know Elizabeth has talked about, more of a boarding house style. So there's other types of homes than what you've talked about that I hope going forward that you consider and looking at. And I really stress with also policy is we ought to have schools where people can live above them, whether they be teachers or whatever. And that's going to be forming more strategic partners. And hopefully this group can help some of those partnerships form. Thank you.
So my name's Connie Marsh, and this is more things I think are missing. And so in my brain, I see this as the gentrification of the suburbs. We're changing forms and we're kicking out some of our affordable housing that was pre-existing, and we're actually creating more dense housing that is more expensive than the existing housing. And so that, I think we have that data. How many lower priced units are going away as we develop high priced units. So we are actually eroding our affordable housing. So I didn't see that there. Also, for King County, I don't think you're going to even be able to solve the problem of allowing people to live in King County and work in King County, much less live in Issaquah and work in Issaquah and age in place in Issaquah. I think the conversation needs to be broadened to surrounding counties because that is where people are commuting from. And I don't think the vision is how do we create this in place for Issaquah. I think it is how do you make people be able to get their employees, live in places that are safe and healthful, and live successfully while doing what they need to do and want to do in Issaquah, which is a much broader vision, because I don't think the vision that you're asking for is solvable. So I would like to see something that is more, has a higher chance of success. Okay, so I would see if you could maybe broaden. I want to see Pierce County statistics. I want to know why I can buy a house in Auburn for a third of the prices in Issaquah. And it's cuter than most of the places in Issaquah. It's just in Auburn. So that's why people are commuting from Auburn to here. Oh, I digress. So I've been reading some literature from some other places, and some of the ways that other places are looking at their issues is they're looking at commuting sheds and trying to figure out how to actually move the people to where they need to go as compared to how to house them in their areas. So instead of putting people in place, it's the motion of people. And I don't know if that makes sense to you or not. I didn't see the statistics on whether our housing prices have gone down as we have added more houses. I mean, I know the answer to that, but I think those statistics need to be in here because the supply and demand in this situation is an important question. Has that been working? And then, of course, I want to see what other people have done to be successful in trying to solve these problems. And really, it's an unsolvable problem, so I don't think you're going to find success. You might find helpful suggestions. But I also want some input on ideas from other people who've already done it. And, okay, I only have a little bit more. I'm going to skip that one. Our form of solving affordable housing in the past. So what has Issaquah done in the past itself that was successful and unsuccessful? We had $50,000 that we were trying to create some sort of center for help for those who were low income, and that just sort of went away. It never happened. Why not? We've had land in the Issaquah Highlands that was slated for affordable housing. It's never happened. Why not? And so what can we learn from our mistakes? And there we go. I'm at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anybody other public comments? Okay, and with that, I guess I will adjourn the group. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming together in this conversation.